Hey Rob. Oh, oh. Hey, while I got you here, can I ask you a quick question about that Rails console thing? Um, so I imagine I tried to do it just from my command line. I didn't think that was gonna work, and it didn't. Is this? Am I supposed to go like? How do I connect to the production server
Uh,
console?
just Heroku run to get the command line on Heroku.
I don't. I've never like been on the. I don't know what.
No, you
Like, am I supposed to log into
literally just
AWS or I
like
don't?
Heroku run like bash if you want the bash console, or like Heroku run like break db migrate if you want to run the migrate command or whatever. Like,
But that, how does that connect to like, I don't know how I'm connected to it, or am I connected to it?
what do you mean?
Like my local machine, how does it know where to run those commands against? Like,
So like when you do this, Heroku will yell at you if it can't figure out based on your Git repository and like where you are on disk in your projects, like what servers it should be connecting to. It'll say like, tell me the name of the app. So then you just do Heroku run bash app, like web monitoring DB. Sorry for the autocorrecting in there, but like, yeah, you can explicitly tell it the app, but otherwise, like if you only have one if you only have one Heroku remote in your Git repository, it'll look at that to figure out what app it should be connecting to, and so you don't have to tell it.
so if I go to the web monitoring DB folder that I have like a clone of the project and run that command, it will be able to connect to.
Yeah,
It will, um,
yeah. All it's doing is like starting an SSH session. So you're like shelled into you're shelled into like a new Heroku server that looks the same as your web server. Um, and then it runs whatever command you've told it to run in it. Or if you're just running bash and it just gives you the shell.
okay. Yeah, sorry. I don't know any of this at all, so it's just confusing. Sorry.
Yeah. But
Apologies.
it's just, I mean, just do Heroku run bash, and that basically is giving you a shell on a Heroku server. And then all the commands you run are running on the Heroku server rather than on your local machine.
But if I don't, that Heroku remote has to point to our production app, right? I don't
Yeah.
think my Heroku has ever been pointing to the production. That's what I'm
Well,
saying. Like,
then just use the dash dash app argument.
okay. And
Like, and you're done. Then it just say remote to this app, and it
I
will
see.
it will
Okay.
do that. The dash dash app is just Heroku decides what should go in there based on your current Git repo. So you're just being more specific, right? That's
Okay.
when you say Heroku run bash, you're saying Heroku run bash dash dash app. Look at my Git remotes and figure out what app you think it is.
Okay.
And if we wind up doing the Docker deployment or the Kubernetes deployment, it's really similar, right? You just do kube control exec it name of pod and then like bash. Well, in this case, you do like bin bash, right? But same thing. Kube control exec it in front of it, right? Which is basically saying kube controls the command instead of Heroku, and exec is like run, and dash it is a little bit extra that it's required there because it's saying give me an interactive console. Like it means interactive and T is TTY. You want those two things together to get something that actually looks like a normal shell. And then name of pod is basically like what's the actual machine you want to connect to, because it's not going to spawn a new one for you like Heroku does. So it's slightly more complicated, but it's basically the same thing.
It says you do not have access to the app web monitoring DB.
You should.
Are there some bash variables to set to tell the Heroku app that you have access?
Yeah, I don't know any of this stuff.
No,
Sorry.
No worries, Kevin. No worries.
it's not. He's not hitting an application level thing. He's hitting Heroku.
No, that's what I meant.
Oh, yeah, it's nothing bash. You just have to actually like give the person access to the Heroku app, which I thought everybody had.
I
Well,
was wondering if Kevin was.
you and
was
Jason
watching.
have it, but Kevin doesn't. What's your
Okay.
email on Heroku again?
I forgot. I haven't used Heroku in a long time, but we can just go with meeting. I'll just do it in chat, and then you can help me, off camera.
This is who we're expecting to have. So Gretchen said choose out.
Mhm.
Are you sure you don't want to keep typing, Kevin, and we'll just all watch you and all three give suggestions?
I mean, I just didn't want to detract from the meeting too much. It felt like.
There you go.
This reminds me of when I used to cook with my roommates, and they're like, you grill and we'll criticize.
You should be able to run it now.
Okay, cool.
Well,
You had access to the UI production. I don't know why you weren't on the DB production.
Because I never ever pushed to it, so I never ran into that problem.
hey, deployment cabal is the theme of today's meeting anyway. So.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Is there a password for this meeting?
It starts with -- begin private key -- /n 4FAC31.
Well, so Gretchen's not going to be here, but she did give an update on Slack a little bit ago that she got our AWS credit grant submitted.
Cool.
I just crunched the numbers for her on that yesterday is whenever I got that to her. So we just clutched it all in. So I guess let's just jump straight into developer updates then. Rob?
So the annotations error codes thing that was sitting around for super long because it was blocked on unrelated conversation or vaguely related conversation is merged, and I've moved the conversation to a new issue. And we finally fixed the environment.yaml deploy instructions in which we discovered that there were a whole lot of other errors in the deploy instructions. And I did the Rails DB upgrade. Still working on the importing scripts. So the first thing I went and did was doing the work to be nicer to Internet Archive and fixing the issues. Well, adding basically more specific errors and throwing nicer errors when we have playback problems. And I figured it was good to separate that work out, so I wrote it as a separate PR. It's kind of blocked, and then the IA importing script is blocked on that. So I think Dan is going to do some work on it because he has a specific idea of how to do it. We should figure out what the right time frame is because I have free time tonight, so I can also just do it tonight. I think we're kind of on the same page about what should happen. But anyway, and then I want to, use some time to actually move the S3 stuff over. I made a note, I think, in the discussion about the bucket names. I want to make sure people are cool with the bucket names because you cannot change bucket names. So it's not like a thing where we can make them and be like, oh, we have thoughts, we'll change them later. You can't do that. So that's the only reason I'm waiting on it. So that issue has my proposed set of names, which I think offer an overall improvement on what we have right now. And we have to make up new names anyway so that we can move them to a new account. So that's that. Up next is basically the same stuff from last week.
Dan?
Sorry, fighting too many tabs. Okay, great. So I think it was within the last week. Time is blurry. The Kubernetes upgrade, yeah, it must have been. So Kubernetes production, as you guys all know, is now running the latest version supported by COPS. We finally got merged some basic reconfiguration about how to deploy processing. There's a comment somewhere that I'll just surface in this discussion that Conda is a package manager very popular with data scientists, and I think we should provide instructions for installing web monitoring processing with Conda for the web monitoring research team and to attract other people who might want to mess around with analysis of our data sets. But I have totally done a 180 on whether Conda is a good tool for deployments. I think we should just rip that out long term of basically everything that we do, other than interactive exploration of the data. So that's what you get when you have a scientist volunteer who's learning how to do ops. But that's at least in like a working place, if not a particularly sane place. I think that's fair to say. So I guess I am now blocking Rob's Be Nicer to IAPR. I have some work in a Vim buffer right now. Rob, I'll have company over tonight, so I know I won't work after working hours tonight. When I'm done with that, when I'm done for the workday, I will ping you and make sure I push everything I've done. Cool. Great.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
I had self-assigned the resource limits stuff, and have some local commits on, or some local work on make sure that if somebody tries to diff a 10 gigabyte PDF that we just give up. That we still want to do. Then we talked about having like a side-along process that makes sure that the overall resource consumption of a differ doesn't get out of control. We're not sure that's a super important failure mode. We just know it's happened once. And that probably isn't worth doing if we end up going with Kubernetes. So we should put that on the back burner anyway. That's it for me.
Okay. Well, so I've been working on the test Ansible deployment, and I got grievously behind due to some unfortunate host-side toolchain issues, but I got back on track a couple days ago, and I literally got to the point of being blocked about 13 minutes ago, which is basically I'm just now trying to actually run the deployment based on the configuration that Dan had already set in this sort of testing Ansible inventory. And what I'm not sure about is all the stuff where we're setting Rails for DB, where we're setting Rails as production. It's got all those credentials for various services we use, like Postmark and New Relic and all of those things. Basically, I'm obviously not doing real production right now, but how close do we want to get to a test production run? Should I be plugging those things in? I assume that would start soiling our, I don't know what the configuration is in any of those services, if that's going to start basically writing non-production junk into our services that are tracking production status. Or obviously sending emails. That might be appropriate or it might not be.
Shouldn't we just be doing something that's effectively equivalent to staging?
I don't know what the staging configuration is. Like I've been working in my little track. This is kind of a Dan question.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking. I'm having to pull this out of my memory banks too. So the testing config is a copy of the staging config.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Because I just saw a lot of very production-y looking things in there. So I was like, is this off of a production environment or not? So
no, definitely not. So here's what I'll tell you. I know I remember correctly, right? I pulled down off of the Heroku UI, the web UI, all of the config, and I put it in production and in staging, respectively. But of course, we had a staging like namespace up. And so I wanted a third one to muck around in. So I copied the Sentry config and the New Relic config and the database config and the S3 bucket config, all that stuff kind of from staging. And I made some local modifications. I think I might have just knocked out New Relic I wanted to make sure Rob didn't get a ton of emails. So I believe I knocked out some stuff entirely.
Well, we shouldn't be including New Relic in anything because we don't actually have a New Relic account. If there are New Relic credentials that you
Did I make that up?
Heroku, well, you might have copied them from Heroku, and they might be the ones auto-supplied by the like magical complete bullshit New Relic account.
Okay.
You get with Heroku, which doesn't actually do hardly does anything useful.
Yeah.
And like, so I don't know if they'll even work if you include them anyway. And I don't know that we want them anyway.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. So the general status though on the Ansible deployment is what I've spent this last week on is some of the platform level stuff that I thought might be useful to us regardless of whether we're going containers or hosts. So like assuming AWS still, but like I've been working on the load balancer deployment's really nice now. And it also handles all the TLS stuff and it gets that applied to the load balancer. I've got it set up so that it creates an RDS instance and adds all the Postgres extensions and all that stuff into an RDS instance, which again would be the same thing no matter what was actually executing the code. And what I had started on before realizing that I was at least 2 weeks behind on this was swapping out some of the provisioner bits that Dan had written for EC2 hosts themselves to try to like make tagging prettier and all of that stuff. But I basically stopped fiddling with that because what Dan had was already working. So like I didn't need to shuffle deck chairs. But so I need to basically stick Dan's provisioner code, hook it back up for the instances themselves. But other than that, I mean, as long as you have that DNS zone file configured, like that Dan right now has is the ansible.envirodata, I mean, it'll literally stand up everything underneath it. Load balancers, certs, database, EC2 instances for UI, diffing, and DB. And then, again, the thing I'm fiddling with right now is just exactly how much of that config to stick into the Rails environment for DB.
Right.
But so, and that's in this branch I've been working on, Dan. That's the namespace pass branch. So I don't know how we want to have people play with that and see if this is what we want to do, or if we just want to say, no, never mind, let's do containers.
Well, I'm perfectly fine with just eagerly merging that into master because it's not like master is stable. So if that's a good place to work off of, feel free. On the other hand, people can just as easily pull down that branch. I mean, do you have a strong opinion one way or the other, or are you still like you haven't really seen the Kubernetes work, so you're not sure what to think of that? You're muted, Jason.
I've not examined I haven't really looked at the Kubernetes stuff. But this seems like a good time for me to do so. And maybe this would be a good time for you guys to play with the Ansible thing so that we can all like, I think, that I can definitely just swap back in your EC2 provisioner and it can be ready to go and run through the Ansible bit by the end of tonight for sure. So now I'll say again, I'm not super familiar with running Kube directly. Like my experience with it is always like using a platform that Kube is underneath. So if somebody wants to point me at some URL to start with for our Kube, for what's happening there right now, for me to start examining that.
Can you stay on after this call, or do you want to stay?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
So I'll tell you this: the README of web monitoring Kube is written very carefully so that future Dan Allen suffering from amnesia should be able to stand up a Kubernetes cluster from scratch. And I bet if you followed that, it would work. I have pretty high confidence in those instructions because I ripped the whole thing down about 4 or 5 times. And then I tried to strictly copy paste from the README and make sure that it literally worked. However, like sharing like the intent or the development is worth a conversation.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and just naively try to run through it. I mean, because that's, and then maybe I can ask you questions after, like the first
That
time.
makes sense. Yeah, then we go like a totally unpolluted. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Okay, let's see here. Back to my speaking of too many tabs. Okay, so yeah, basically, you know, I should add to my up next, play with Kube. If we're gonna go the Ansible route, there's a whole mess of like configuration cruft. Like I've basically clutched a bunch of new stuff into the Ansible playbook, and then it doesn't really jive with what Dan has done before. So those things need to be resolved and merged to actually make sense for a person who's wanting to configure stuff.
I see. Okay.
And then, you know, if we were going to do this with Ansible, I would break out those roles to be public.
That seems like something to do after we make the call one way or
yes,
another.
Yes.
Right. Good idea. Yeah.
Yes, those two things are both pending. Are we using Ansible at all?
Right.
Okay, that's my updates.
Okay, so if we smoothly transition into some decision making there, so it sounds like we're behind in that there isn't a thing that's immediately evaluatable, but theoretically there will be tonight. Okay. Are we okay with that, or did we miss our deadline and we're done?
Yeah, if we're just defaulting to Kube, I mean, honestly, I'm okay with like that's. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to call it like, you know, Ansible is a failure and that's why we're using Kube. But I think that the reasons that we went over last week, I'll speak for myself. I kind of talked myself into like, you know, the reasons that we backpedaled on this and decided to evaluate it so carefully that we would build the whole thing in Ansible again. Since then, I think we've learned enough about our own needs and enough about Kubernetes that I'm pretty optimistic that that's the right choice for us in 6 months. And if it's the right choice for us in 6 months, then maybe it should be the right choice for us now, and we should just do it. That said, like we've sunk the cost into building all of Ansible. So why don't you spend a week and at least look at it, and we'll leave open the possibility of coming back to Ansible. If you look at our Kubernetes thing and say, oh guys, have you considered this reason why Ansible would be a better fit after a week of looking at it? And after a week of looking at it, if we don't find any huge problems with Kube, then we just say, let us never speak of Ansible again. That's my pitch.
Yeah, my feeling is definitely that sunk cost does not equal value. So, you know, in terms of how ready this thing is to roll, it doesn't matter how much time got put into Ansible if Kube is the right thing. And you know, the tool chain issues I had were issues that I would not have had if I were just on a pure container workflow. So although like in my mind, that's like, oh, this is like an arbitrary delay, but you know, it was because I wanted a local VM testing environment to run through this stuff, which is a very typical Ansible way to do it. So I mean, I think that's a valid tick against Ansible and VMs.
Okay. Have you used Helm before? I think we want, I'm trying to think about what we want to do to Kube before we move production to Kube. I think it's just logs and making sure Grafana works.
Sure. I think, what did we say? Yeah, logs, and we need to there was something. This is not a big deal, but also related, Jason, to you checking it out. The thing that's missing from documentation in that repo is how to export and use a cluster's configuration on your machine. Basically how to make your kube control instance connect to our cluster rather than setting up a whole new one, which is like a two-liner, but it's not in there. And I had to go hunt it down when I stripped my machine down and rebuilt it 2 weeks ago. So we should add that because everybody else will need it to running it, and somebody needs to be able to manipulate it. You have to actually connect to the existing cluster instead of the new one. And all the docs in that repo are about how to build something from scratch.
I mean, I'll be honest. So this is just vibe from me. Like after having spent all this time hammering on Ansible, I mean, my gut check says it feels like it's stepping backwards. I mean, coming off of running things in Heroku, you know, or on another platform as a service where it's just like my process is running and it's providing me data and writing its standard out and standard error to things. You know, if we could make the move to AWS for production, but have a workflow that's more like that, I mean, that feels better to me.
Should we call time of death for Ansible?
Wait, I'm okay. I'm confused. I don't understand what you were saying.
I thought Jason was saying Ansible felt like a step backward, but maybe I read it backwards.
Okay, that's not what I heard. So
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I think that Ansible does feel like a step backwards. Like
okay then.
So I'm interested, and it sounds like, I mean, again, I'm not up to speed on our kube as much as I am on our Ansible, but I sure hate to just keep dragging this out.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, I feel a little bit bad for setting you on this task that we're going to kill to start, but I feel better because I think that a lot of it was you getting to know all the pieces and how they fit together. And it seems like this is where we want to go overall.
well, I say, can we just call a vote? I mean,
Sure.
I would say vote to just go with kube, kill Ansible. Let's make kube work.
Okay.
All right.
Then we're done.
Thanks for being a good sport about being sent down this sidetrack, Jason. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jay.
Oh, it's fine. We'll just move on.
All right. So I think the ball's in my court to finish the logging bit, make sure that everything that I think works is still alive. So I'm not telling you to go test something that is in fact broken. And then to create documentation aimed at an audience of, let's say, Kevin, to how to do basic tasks that you know how to do on Heroku on Cube.
Which is actually 0.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing to remember is I've got a lot more time as a contractor than you guys do as volunteers to put into this. So even if it's not as like per hour time efficient to sick me on some of these tasks, it might be more calendar efficient to put me on. You know, any bit of it that you feel like you can delegate off and just let me run into the problems. I've basically got a 20-hour a week cap that I can put into working on things.
Okay. You can stay on after 2:30. Why don't we come up with a list of stuff?
Okay, I think that wraps up our deployment talk.
Did Did Kevin just say he had to go, or did he just disappear for technical
I
problem?
think he just vanished for technical reasons, but he'd been sort of blipping, hadn't he?
I didn't notice. I had flipped my head around to try and put action items down on the notes.
Sorry, work stuff is popping up on my screen. Back to you guys. Okay. Should we transition into? I'm sorry. Was there more in the minutes about that was general, or should we jump into Coop stuff? Oh, lots of stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
we had kind of a long list.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll skip past all these very bike shitty things. Is there some update on sysadmin hiring?
No, other than we've agreed to find a time to talk about it.
Yeah, we basically it is whenever we get to the point that we have that sorted out. I'm going to post the job to Code for Lib. We're not there yet though, and also I need to go through and look and see if we've got that documented in the workflow stuff for hiring, for access to the hiring mailbox, or how that works.
That's a good idea.
Okay. Then there were kind of bug shitty things. I don't know if there's anything especially worth talking about on the public access discussion. It feels like we're just moving in that direction now, at least for the
I have
state.
a question actually. So I see a real mixing of concerns of making the staging repo that we reserve the right to knock over by accident regularly with the like demo product that we show to potential partner organizations that we're trying to impress. Is it just a question of trying to conserve resources and saying we obviously don't want to make production public for keeping things quiet reasons, and staging we're going to pay for anyway, so we'll make that the thing that we show people?
I didn't know that there was any use case or concern about having a thing to show like other orgs and people.
I see. Why make staging public?
Because that way anybody who wants to dive in and work on stuff can actually connect to staging and get data.
Anybody meaning like general Reddit user or?
Sure. Like anybody who wants to, like, so right now, so DB gets gets some commits. It gets a lot of commits from various random people whenever like DigitalOcean is doing Hacktoberfest or like Mozilla is doing their, like Mozilla Lab Day thing. And none of the other ones really do. And one of my original theories was that part of that was just that it is the more organized of all the code bases, and it's using a very familiar like framework for people. But I think another aspect of it, after thinking about it, and especially like all of Pat Kahn's points about like getting things set up and running, is that even though it's complicated to run, it's actually the easiest thing to deal with because you don't need anything external.
Right.
Versus UI, like you either also have to have the DB running or you have to connect to the staging DB. And if you like don't have access to the staging DB, then you can't do that. Like we sort of made it easy by saying it just automatically uses the staging DB as a resource when you set it up. Except if you don't have credentials for staging, then that's not going to help you. So all the work that you can do on it is just like in theory. Right. I think if I make this change in this code, it will work, which is of no use to anyone.
Okay, so we're making it public as a development resource to decrease the friction for new contributors.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could totally use it as a thing to show off too, but I don't think that was in my head as like the primary point.
Got it.
It was more in my head as like needs to be public as a better development resource and also as a first step towards getting production public-ish.
Yep.
Because half of the things we have to do for staging, we can do are required for prod too.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I had no big problem with that, but I think I missed whatever initial discussion was around it, and I was curious just how people were thinking about how that was meant to be.
Got it.
Okay. Uh,
The next one is just like, what's the status really from you on the repo breakup?
oh, I skipped past that one.
Processing smash.
Right. I think it's good to sit on things like that so you don't end up thrashing them.
Mhm.
And we have some open PRs and some work to do on this repo, and I don't think it's super hurting us that it happens to be monolithic right now. So I still think that's a good idea, but I'm gonna wait until I have a solid chunk of time to do it and finish it, because you don't want that PR halfway done hanging in space for 2 weeks.
One thing we're thinking about there that was not a thing that I knew about until yesterday is Mark is talking about showing off Wayback's usage of it. They're like very much in development usage of it at their annual bash at the beginning of October.
I see. So we might get a lot of forks at that point, and we want to make sure it's clean.
If he says anything about like, oh, this is a like collaboration between us and Edgy and blah blah blah, and you can see the source code here, then we might get a lot of eyes on it all of a sudden. So it might be helpful for it to be separate by then.
Got it. Okay.
But I mean, I don't know that should be our chief concern. Just like worth having in the back of your head. If there's a good deadline for it, that's a good deadline for it.
Okay.
Otherwise, ignore it and blow past it.
No, that's fine.
The other two things on here are just super bike shitty. So if you want to get into working through cube stuff, that's probably better than talking about this stuff.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, Jason might have some good opinions on this. I certainly have no opinions.
Okay.
I mean, about NPM and Yarn specifically. But
okay. That's the dumber one of the two, which is so all the JS projects use Yarn for dependency management, and they use Yarn because Yarn offered, when we built them, really critical improvements over NPM, in particular lock files that weren't total bullshit, and speed, but that wasn't that big a deal. It was more about lock files. And NPM has that now. The new lock files are actually reasonable as opposed to their shrink wrap files, which were terrible. And it's gotten faster, and any of the additional like useful Yarn features are really for projects that are way bigger and more complicated than what we have. And we have seen a few times where people are like, what is this Yarn thing I have to deal with installing now in order to, work on the app? So just a sort of like general question of like, would it make sense to drop Yarn, which is really not that big a change, just to switch to just using NPM instead of Yarn.
My vote is yes. I like having as concise of a tool chain as possible, and going with as boring, broadly known things as possible. And yeah, definitely NPM is a more broadly known poison. So I think that sounds great.
Yeah, it also just comes pre-installed with Node, so you don't have to do anything extra. Okay, so I'll make an issue for doing that on the two projects that applies to. The other super bug shitty thing was this question about our UUID named fields in the database.
we can always, from built-ins, import ID as _ID. So fair enough.
Well,
I didn't do the JSON API thing.
So I feel like most every Python ORM is just happy with ID also. Because I mean, it doesn't, if you're only ever using it as an attribute, it's not getting in the way of anything, right?
Certainly, it's not going to give you a problem that you couldn't dig yourself out of by importing from built-ins. So,
okay. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I guess like, I feel like what we did adds some confusion for usage of the API and a lot of complexity for implementation. Because like you gotta do a lot, like every set of tools around like database modeling makes it easy to have a primary key named ID. And then the good ones give you ways to do other stuff, but you're just adding a lot of complexity to be like, this table has this magical primary key. This one has this other one.
Yeah, go ahead and do it. That's
So
fine.
that was my thing. And also JSON API is like, nope, your things will be named ID, which is not what they are in the database. It's fine if they're different, but it's nice if they're not different.
Right. When we had this original discussion, I think I did not know about JSON : API as a thing. So
Okay.
I think that
Okay.
makes
So
sense.
I'm
Sorry
happy
for
about that too.
pulling us in that direction.
Nah. It didn't seem that unreasonable at the time. And when I've done half my work on small things and half my work on like ridiculous enterprisey systems, what we were talking about is not all that uncommon in ridiculous enterprisey systems. So I was just like, I've seen this pattern also. That's totally reasonable.
Okay.
So it's just, you know, same as the Ansible thing. We all trotted very far down a path that it took us a while to realize was probably not the right path.
Yep.
I think that's all the items in discussion here.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
I think that wraps meeting proper.
All right. Rob, if you can hang out, feel free to hang out. Otherwise, we'll just hang out with Jason.
Yeah. Okay. So
We are, just for context for you guys, I'm in the middle of a deployment at work. We're turning the X-ray beam on next week. And I think I can go into overtime because I don't see anything on fire, but I might have to leave with like a minute notice if something terrible happens at work.
okay. Well, I'm just going to start by looking at web monitoring Kube.
Great. So this was the audience for this README document was future me / random organization like web integrity project that wants to deploy this from scratch, just to prove the point that Kubernetes gives us this extra thing that we don't really need today, but we sort of want in the vague 6-month, 1-year future, or I don't know if you listen to Tully, maybe even later this year, of somebody else standing this thing up with minimal help from us, right? But what we actually want for us, I think, is something more like that my binder deploy, where it like explains to, you know, someone like Kevin or Ray or Gretchen, you know, here are the names of the components of the things. Here's who to ask for the secrets that you need to be able to access it. Here's where to put those things on your laptop. And then here are like step-by-step instructions for common tasks, like increasing the resources available, or upgrading to the newest version, or you know, responding to an outage and doing the first round of diagnoses. That's the kind of stuff I'd like to see documented. So that's a thing to be done. Another thing to be done is integrating with something like CloudWatch. Rob, can you remember what one we even use now? I'm embarrassed that I don't know that. It's LogWatch.
Oh, for logs, I want to say it's Logly. It's, I mean, we have the like Heroku integration, which it's also not, is probably not suitable for us going forward in the future, because they got bought by, I think, Red Hat, and then their prices went through the roof.
I see. Okay. I vote for CloudWatch. Is there any reason to do something better than CloudWatch?
Probably not.
Very
Log
straightforward
entries.
to install.
Log entries is what we currently have.
Wait, say it again?
Log entries.
Oh, okay. Same story though? That's the one that got bought by Red Hat?
They got bought by somebody.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was going the other day to look at all the various commodity services for this that provide a nice interface.
Yeah.
A lot of them that are nice have like a free tier, and our needs aren't especially extreme here.
Mhm.
So I was looking at that, and so I had gone to look at log entries to see if we had an actual real account instead of the like really dumb Heroku integration.
Yeah.
And their free tier disappeared, and I was like, "What's the deal with that?" And then
Yeah.
I got bought.
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of integration, it doesn't really matter. The sticking point for me became, or the confusing point for me became, how do you multiplex logs out? And Amazon CloudWatch has a nice way to do that. It's no problem. So
Yeah, the way to set the log groups and then individual streams is really nice.
yes. And we've already done that for Ansible. So also, Jason and I at least know how to do it. I think Rob's used it before, it sounds like. So
Awesome.
yep. Okay, done. So we need to do that. That's not done at all. The other thing we need to worry about is Grafana. Is it even up? Is a question that I have. Let's see. Edgy has like the longest URL.
Oh. So I'm sure I can find this somewhere else, but the install instructions for the kube CLI is a 404.
Ooh, okay, that's probably just bit rot.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you on a Mac or Windows or Linux?
I'm on Windows.
Do you use a package manager?
Well, what I've been doing is I work almost exclusively in WSL, so user space Linux.
Oh, okay.
So there, it's just like
Windows system, right?
yeah. But obviously that doesn't work for containers. So I do also have Docker set up, although I just have it set up for Docker Compose, not Kube. So I'll have to figure out how I want to do that on my.
Right. All I was going to say is if you're using a package manager, which I don't think WSL gives you, you still need to be using like Pacman or something.
Oh yeah, in that it's just apt.
Okay. Yeah. So all of this is on. You can just apt install AWS CLI.
Cool.
apt-get.
Cool.
I think it's kube control. I don't know what the.
Sorry, I take care of work for 20 seconds. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
You can just install them with apt if you have that.
Yeah, and I've got. Let's see here.
Okay, I'm back. Does it say? Wait, hang on, Jason. I did share with you the secret sharing Keybase.
Yeah. Yep.
I thought I had.
Yep.
Yes, that is critical.
Yeah, that's important. I think I was trying to get Redis to deploy through this too, and per our conversation recently, I think we actually don't even want. We don't want an automated solution to stand up RDS. Like for example, Ansible, you said stands up RDS. My original goal with all these stuff was to say you should just say, create my beautiful web differ, and then it should go create everything. But after talking to Yubi, I think that you want Amazon specific instructions that say, here's how to stand up your persistent storage separately from here's how to stand up your cluster. And then if we ever move to Google, we do the same thing for the Google specific services.
Yeah. Well, and I think, honestly, those pieces of the Ansible bit might actually be worth keeping, because that's super straightforward. Like all it does is run on localhost and talk to the services, and you plug in your secrets and your, you could make it configurable for the sizing, but
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So there should be a load balancer in front of the Grafana. That's what I'm trying to find, because I don't think it has an SURL. The other thing I want to change about this, we wouldn't have to do it. Sorry, unstructured thoughts. Give me a second.
I already have JQ.
Okay, so the two things we need before we move production, we have a big problem with production right now in that members of our team can't use it, right? Staging, really. Staging, like Kevin doesn't know how to deploy to staging. I believe that's true. And he has asked many times for instructions, and we haven't committed to a thing to give it to him. So that's a problem I'd like to solve as soon as possible. And we should do that when we move staging and production to the same system. And the only things that are really blocking that, the only thing that's really, really blocking that is logging and making sure that basic monitoring works. However, in addition to doing those things, I think we want to do these other pieces that we're talking about, like making sure that we manage RDS through Ansible. And along with that, I think we want to move the certificate management out of Amazon, because that doesn't integrate well with Kube right now. We have to put semi-secret information in the in templates that nominally aren't secrets templates. And if we do it with Let's Encrypt, we can just avoid that.
So,
I found now a working example of that we can just steal.
I was about to say, I've actually written a let's go out and universally do Let's Encrypt stuff from an
Nice.
Ansible control machine and keep it in a local encrypted data store.
That works great.
And it can plop them over to remote hosts via SSH if that's the way it needs to do it, or you can handle it some other way.
Okay, great. I think any way that involves Let's Encrypt and doesn't involve Amazon certificate management works for me. There's also really strict limits on the number of certs you get from Amazon, and that's not clear to me. It's not even like a free tier limit. It seems to be like some sort of global limit. I'm sure there's a way out, but it seems dumb. Great, nice.
Yeah, and this actually runs way faster than the current thing in Ansible that's going through Amazon, because it uses the HTTP validation instead of using DNS validation, because that DNS validation by definition has tons of latency in it.
Right, right. Oh, I like that. I tried to get that working for us actually. When I tried to do Let's Encrypt, I never got it working. So it's cool that you did.
For what it's worth, though, I don't think any of that stuff, aside from the logging, should prevent us from moving staging over.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally.
From moving production over.
Yeah.
Like those are all good things that we should continue to do. They shouldn't stop us from moving it, right? Those things are manual now.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that they would, like, automating them is to go back to what you said earlier today, Jason, like the real point is to make deploying on AWS at least half as good as deploying on Heroku.
Yep. Yeah. I would at least like it to, if we can get to the point where it is a process with a punch list and some notes, like that.
Yep.
I would hate to let perfect be the enemy of working.
Yep.
Yeah, so it doesn't need to address anything that we're not already addressing.
Yep, agree.
So I think really just making notes about those things. So that's a manual process that somebody does. And where are the steps to that? Okay.
Right. I'm trying really hard to find this Grafana just so that we can all look at it if it's up. But, right, huh. So maybe a place for you to start is trying to redeploy this, but maybe another place to start is just to add the CloudWatch stuff to our Docker containers.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable. I think if Let me go peek in our EC2. So how is the kube stuff that I see running in EC2, how is that deployed? The stuff that's in there now. Is that staging?
That's staging.
What was that process that got us to the point to those resources being there?
So after deploying it from the instruction set in the README about 5 times and ensuring that basically worked, Rob and I went through it with, I think, me typing and him migrating the database over from the Kubernetes-based staging deployment. And then we just aimed this deployment at that RDS, and I think it was about that simple. Do you remember anything else, Rob?
Nope, I think that's about how it went.
Okay.
So all those credentials are just in the secrets file.
Well, so, I mean, theoretically, then we should just be able to toss all this Ansible-related stuff out. Not that we're paying for those credits, but no sense in having it running. And we should be able to like recreate our current stage, like make another environment, just called something that's not staging, as a workflow for getting through this deploy on Amazon, right? Just to refresh ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Couldn't we just do that again and call that production?
Yeah. Another thing I would like to do is there are a lot of AWS resources, be they EC2 VMs or load balancers or whatever, that are floating around and not super clearly labeled. And some of them I'm just about dead certain are just floating there. And some of them I'm not sure whether they are part of an Ansible deploy or a kube deploy, or they're just floating there.
Yeah.
So I would like to figure that out also and get rid of them and make sure that the ones that do get set up automatically are somehow labeled, that they're clear what they belong to. I don't know if there's a good way to make sure that Kops or Kubernetes is doing that. Anything that you do to programmatically stand stuff up in AWS supports tagging. That was actually been the scariest, most double check inducing thing for me as I've been playing with this. Is like, okay, what is this stuff? So absolutely today, since we're killing Ansible, I'm going to go ahead and kill all the stuff that I know right now is Ansible deployed, because I've been playing with it. I know what that stuff looks like. So we can at least get rid of that.
Another question: Do we want to do like a I think it's called like a Bastion host type deployment model where you SSH in and you always run kube control from some machine?
So I'm very used to, in like sort of more enterprisey environments, having something like that and locking down everything and having one endpoint with SSH as sort of your management service.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that seems like it might be a little bit overkill, especially if we're basically going to be doing things from, well, let me think about that. More security than no security seems like a good idea.
Well, I mean, to talk to the cluster, you still have to have the keys. So, I mean, it is, has private key authentication.
I was actually thinking about it from a usability point of view of if the instruction is not install Kubernetes and make sure you have the right version of Kubernetes client and get all the secrets, blah, 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 blah. But it's just, here's a copy of the key to this EC2 instance. Log in and use it.
Now, I'll say the downside to that is institutional memory of what actually needs to happen for that to function dies, and then your critical ops are based on that stateful SSH host being up and functional. And whenever it has a problem, nobody remembers.
That's a good point. For my convenience, I'm actually against this, so I'm not pushing for it. But I wanted to just kind of see what your two experience were.
I think if you're trying to solve a usability problem with it rather than a security problem, the better solution is to wrap the Kubernetes commands in a script that goes and says like, oh, are you connected? Like, let me automatically like try and pull all down the cluster config for you and prompt you for passwords.
Got it.
Yeah, a little bit of Bash or Python ops wrapper. I think that could be a really good fit. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a better solve than having a like central like authenticated only machine that can do deploys situation, which is good for security, but I don't think it's yeah, we can enhance usability in better ways than
That makes total sense.
that.
Okay, so I can't find this Grafana thing quickly, and it's better if I go look for that offline and email you a link. But we don't even super need that because we can just look at what Amazon gives us about our nodes, right? I think what's interesting there is that you get easy per pod metrics, which could be useful, right?
Well, I think my homework now. Unfortunately, I've already burned through a large chunk of my hours this week on Ansible, but
Yeah.
my homework is to run through the kube stuff. I'll do that locally and see what I can get going. And if I've got questions, just like I did at the start of Ansible, Dan, I'll just DM you.
How constrained are you about when you work, Jason? I absolutely don't want to infringe on your family time, but you pick out Saturday or something to do production?
That's a great question. My work time actually is pretty flexible. I have toddlers, so I never have a day off from my own life. So that means that I basically end up doing a couple hours of work every day of the week on something. So there's not really a bad day for me. Really, it's more about what times of day. So during the weekdays, mornings are great because my girls are in pre-K, so it's quiet. And then on the weekends, afternoon during nap times are the best times, Central Time. But we can work something out.
That's probably good for Rob too, because won't be waking him up. What if we tentatively planned to move production to Cube on the 22nd of September in the afternoon?
Pull up my. That looks wide open for me. Honestly, I feel better about doing this even with some manual parts that we've documented on the 22nd with Kube than having the whole thing automated with Ansible by the 22nd. So I feel like this is.
It sounds like we're making the right decisions.
Yeah.
So that's a good day for me too.
Okay. We can check back in closer to and make sure that we're sure that we're ready. But it looks like all we need is CloudWatch. So Jason, I'm just going to say that's your problem.
Yep.
And
yep.
I'm not gonna sideline the work on that PR with Rob that I said I'd do today. But once that's done, I'll shift toward documentation mode.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll let you know if anything becomes a blocker for me for logging.
Okay. Lovely.
Okay, I think that's a wrap unless anybody has anything else.
Quick question on the subject of like random resources floating around in AWS. Do either of you know there is a load balancer named API Server Load Balancer in Northern California where we have no other instances? It's not connected to any instances. Can I delete it?
US West 1?
Yes. I think that's what Northern California is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's USF1.
Weird. Okay, yeah. Kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
If it's something I made, I don't care about it, so.
I have no idea how it came to be. It's even possible it could have been me at some time in the past. I don't know. It's gone now though.
Great. Well, I'm gonna delete a whole bunch of stuff out of West 2. So
there's $20 a month off the bill.
Nice. Okay, guys. Cool. Always good talking to you. See ya.